116 square kilometers. That is how much territory Ukraine liberated from Russia in April 2026 alone. 116 square kilometers. Not empty farmland, not symbolic swaths of scorched earth. Strategically vital ground, ripped back from Putin's hands in a single month. And here is why that number is so devastating for Russia. April 2026 marks the first time Russia has suffered a net territorial loss since August 2024. The spring offensive that Putin designed specifically to break Ukraine's eastern fortress belt. The offensive he built tens of thousands of additional soldiers for, the one his generals promised would finally deliver the Donbas, has not just stalled, it has reversed. It is Ukraine that is advancing now. It is Ukraine that is dictating the pace and the terms of this war. Picture what that means. Russia began this conflict in February 2022 by occupying 27% of Ukraine within weeks. For the better part of 4 years, the story of this war has been a grinding Russian advance. Slow, costly, brutal, but an advance nonetheless. Now that story has flipped entirely. And Putin, surrounded by generals who lie to his face, cannot even see it happening. In this video, we will look at exactly how Russia's spring offensive collapsed before it got off the ground. Why Ukraine's military machine has become something Putin never prepared for. How a combination of drone warfare, active defense strategy, and Russian incompetence has produced the most dramatic battlefield reversal in this war's history. And what this means for Putin, for Russia, and for the Donbas fortress belt he needs so desperately to take. But first, let's look at what Russia's spring offensive was actually supposed to accomplish. Early March 2026 was supposed to be the beginning of the end. Putin's commanders had spent months signaling that this spring would be different. Tens of thousands of additional soldiers were mobilized. Reserve forces were positioned. The propaganda machine went into overdrive with promises of an inevitable Russian advance through the last remaining Ukrainian holdouts in Luhansk and, more critically, through the Donbas fortress belt, that heavily fortified string of cities running along the highway between Kostiantynivka and Sloviansk, home to nearly 400,000 people before the war and defended with more than a decade of fortification. This was the prize. Take the fortress belt, and Russia controls the last 30% of Donetsk that it needs to claim the Donbas entirely. That was Putin's plan for 2026. Now look at what actually happened. Russia recorded its first net territorial loss in almost 2 years. March, the month the offensive was supposed to launch in earnest, produced almost zero net gains across 31 days of fighting. According to data from the Institute for the Study of War, Russia seized a mere 23 square kilometers of Ukraine during the entire month. 2 days of fighting at Russia's March 2025 pace would have yielded more territory. That is how far Russia's offensive power has fallen. And then April came, and it got dramatically worse. Russia did not just fail to advance, it lost ground. 116 square kilometers of net Ukrainian gain. The man who promised the Donbas would fall is watching Ukraine take his territory instead. So why is this happening? What broke Russia's spring offensive? The answer is a web of compounding failures, and it starts with the ground itself. The winter of 2025 into 2026 was colder and considerably wetter than the previous year. March and April became a morass of mud, spring rains combining with defrosting soil to create terrain that swallows vehicles whole. Russia responded to this the only way it knows how. More manpower, more metal, and it has gone exactly as badly as that strategy deserves. Russia's tanks and armored vehicles cannot move through the Ukrainian mud. They are immobilized, exposed, useless. The fire support and protection they are supposed to provide to advancing infantry simply does not materialize. And when a Russian armored vehicle sinks into the spring mud, The soldiers inside are not told to wait for better conditions. They are ordered out. They march through the sludge on foot, and Ukraine's drones find them every time. Here is where it gets serious. 96% of Russian casualties in this war are now being inflicted by drones. 96%. That means tens of thousands of Russian soldiers are being eliminated each month without ever reaching close enough to a Ukrainian soldier to exchange fire. It is meat against machine, and Russia keeps feeding the machine. The casualty numbers from March 2026 are records. Over 35,300 Russian soldiers killed or wounded in a single month, a 29% increase over February. That surpasses the previous grim monthly record set in December 2025 by more than 350 casualties. On a single day in late April, Russia lost 1,470 soldiers. Multiply that by 30 and you reach a monthly projection of 44,100 dead or wounded. Ukraine's defense minister has set a target of 50,000 Russian casualties per month by the end of the year. Russia is nearly there already. Stay with us, because it gets worse. Russia cannot replace these losses. Since December 2025, Russia has lost more soldiers each month than it has been able to recruit. 4 consecutive months of negative net manpower. The United Kingdom's Ministry of Defense has confirmed this trend. Russia is currently recruiting an average of 1,120 soldiers per day, which barely keeps pace with a daily casualty rate that regularly climbs between 1,000 and 1,200 and spikes far higher on the worst days. Russia's annual recruitment target of 409,000 contract soldiers for 2026 is a fiction. At current rates, it will fall short by tens of thousands before the year is out. And the soldiers that Russia is recruiting are not soldiers in any meaningful sense. 10 days of combined medical screening and training before deployment to the front. 5 days in a classroom, 5 days waiting. Against Ukraine's most experienced drone units, artillery crews, and seek and destroy teams. Until now, Russia has been able to sustain the human cost of this war through sheer weight of numbers. That advantage is evaporating. And then there is the lie at the heart of Putin's command structure. His generals are not telling him the truth. Russia's chief of the general staff publicly claimed that Russia had captured 700 square kilometers of Ukraine during the first 2 months of the spring offensive. Independent data shows net territorial losses. These two things cannot both be true. The general is lying. Whether he is doing it to preserve his own position, since Putin is well known for punishing those who deliver bad news, or to maintain the fiction for external audiences, is irrelevant. The consequence is the same. Putin is making strategic decisions based on a war that does not exist. He is fighting a phantom reality while Ukraine operates in the real one. This is the death knell for the Fortress Belt campaign. Russia's plan was a classic pincer movement. Attack the Fortress Belt from both its northern and southern ends simultaneously. Compress Ukraine's defenses, stretch their reserves, create breakthroughs at both flanks. The plan required coordinated advances at Zakhitna and Krasny Liman in the north, and around Liman and Konstantinivka in the south. What actually happened is that the northern push stalled within weeks, achieving only marginal advances before hitting the Ukrainian wall. And the southern thrust, the one that was supposed to close the pincer, has barely moved at all. Russia has deployed its 3rd Combined Arms Army and elements of its 8th Combined Arms Army to these tasks. Both are now grinding against fortifications that have been built up since 2014. Over a decade of Ukrainian preparation, Russia has been fighting to take tiny settlements outside the fortress belt for nearly 2 years. Now, it expects to collapse the belt itself inside 12 months. Institute for the Study of War researchers predicted in December 2025 that Russia is unlikely to seize the full fortress belt before 2027 or 2028 at the earliest. The spring offensive's early trajectory suggests even that timeline may be optimistic. And then Ukraine made its move. Ukraine's active defense strategy for 2026 is not what Russia prepared for. It is not a grand sweep of territory, not the dramatic counteroffensive of 2022. It is something more methodical, more precise, and ultimately more devastating. Ukraine identifies where Russia is weakest. It strikes there, hard and fast, in coordinated operations that exploit gaps before Russia can plug them. It defends stubbornly where it must. It attacks relentlessly where Russia least expects. Every Russian unit that gets disrupted, every supply depot that gets destroyed, every communications tower that goes dark, these are not isolated incidents. They are the cumulative product of a strategy designed to fragment Russia's military cohesion across the entire front line. The mid-range drone is the spine of this strategy. Flying up to 200 kilometers behind the Russian front lines, these weapons reach targets that Russia previously considered safe. Ammunition depots in Luhansk, logistics hubs in Zaporizhia, command posts across the occupied territories. Between December 2025 and March 2026 alone, Ukraine launched 1,588 mid-range drone strikes, hitting 408 confirmed targets. March alone saw 222 confirmed hits. 96 Russian air defense and radar systems were destroyed in April. Russia's infiltration tactics, the small squads it sends into gray zones ahead of the front to claim territory for Gerasimov's inflated statistics, are being systematically hunted down. Ukraine has built dedicated seek-and-destroy units that operate precisely in those gray zones. And when Ukraine's mid-range drones have already destroyed the supply chains and communications infrastructure that those infiltration squads depend on, the squads wither. The squads that survive are the ones that surrender. But perhaps the single biggest structural shift is what is happening to Russia's communications. When SpaceX terminated Russia's illicit access to Starlink terminals, Starlink data traffic used by Russian military units dropped by 75%. That is not a setback. That is a catastrophic communications collapse. The Russian military had built its operational coordination around technology it was stealing from a Western satellite network. Without it, units cannot coordinate at the speed modern warfare demands. Putin's crackdown on Telegram usage, the last informal communications channel Russian soldiers relied on, has compounded the isolation. The Russian front line is increasingly fragmented, operating on outdated communications with barely trained soldiers and equipment that cannot move through the mud. Meanwhile, Ukraine is training more, reorganizing for unit cohesion, building a defense industry that reduces its dependency on Western aid, producing weapons that Russia never anticipated it could manufacture. The early results of 2026 are in. Russia recorded its worst monthly territorial outcome in nearly 2 years. Its casualty rate is climbing toward records that were set only last month. Its recruitment pipeline is failing. Its propaganda apparatus is beginning to turn against it, including Yuri Podolaka, a pro-Russian military blogger with nearly 3 million followers, who has now publicly declared that Russia will experience catastrophic losses against the fortress belt, and that he cannot see a way for the situation to change. One of the Kremlin's most powerful unofficial voices is telling millions of people that Russia is losing. Putin does not know it yet, or perhaps he does, and that is why he is asking for a ceasefire just to protect a parade. Russia's Victory Day celebration on the 9th of May 2026 will feature no tanks, no armored vehicles, no artillery, no missiles, nothing. For the first time in 18 years, Red Square will be empty of military hardware. The equipment is either burning in Ukraine or too precious to risk in Moscow. Both explanations are admissions of the same thing. Russia built its spring offensive for a version of this war in which momentum was on its side. That version no longer exists. Ukraine has taken over 116 square kilometers in a single month, destroyed dozens of air defense systems, and demolish the logistics chains that Putin's frontline forces depend on. The fortress belt stands. The pincer has failed. The offensive is over. Putin never saw this coming. That is why he cannot stop it. If you found value in this, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.